Essay in defense of Jane Fonda. In a previous essay, I have dealt with United States veterans' misguided outrage towards Jane Fonda. In this essay, I will address the pretend hatred conservative politicians, journalists, and commentators have toward Jane Fonda. The staged outrage levied against Jane Fonda should not be taken seriously. The people who feign disdain are hypocrites, and they know they are acting in a hypocritical manner. They say they are concerned about the offended veterans, but their ostensible purpose is quite obvious. To them, Jane Fonda is nothing more than a political football used to advance their agenda. And how do I know? It is what the detractors of Jane Fonda are willing to accept or forgive, which prove their hatred toward Fonda is manufactured for political gains. While condemning Jane Fonda as a traitor for her actions in 1972, these same detractors have no problem accepting or forgiving the actions of Barry Goldwater, Ronald Reagan, Jesse Helms, William Rehnquist, Jeff Sessions, Strom Thurmond, William Buckley, and many others who took a hostile view towards civil rights and African Americans. The group of men just mentioned were well aware of the plight endured by blacks during the 1950s and 1960s and said adamantly there was no need for change and felt blacks should simply accept their lot in life. Below are several examples of their hostility towards African Americans. Let's begin with Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater was the Republican presidential nominee of 1964. He openly opposed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. He also opposed Brown versus Board of Education, which allowed black and white students to go to school together. Goldwater's opposition to federal intervention on behalf of blacks took place in an atmosphere of intense racial hostility. Jesse Helms believed in black intellectual inferiority, opposed interracial marriages, and called the Civil Rights Act of 1964 the single most dangerous piece of legislation ever introduced in the Congress. In regards to the civil rights protesters of the 1960s, he said, "The Negro cannot count forever. The kind of restraint that's thus far left him free to clog the streets, disrupt traffic, and interfere with other men's rights." This man honestly felt that blacks were interfering with the rights of whites, as opposed to the whites who were preventing blacks from progressing socially and politically. Ronald Reagan opposed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He also opposed the Voting Rights Act of 1965 because of his support of white Southern rights. He was reported to have said that the acts were humiliating to the South. In regards to the Fair Housing Act, Reagan was also reported to have said in 1966, "If an individual wants to discriminate against Negroes or others in selling or renting his house, it is his right to do so." Strom Thurmond in 1948 called civil rights legislation totalitarianism. He also said in the same year, "There is not enough troops in the army to force the Southern people to break down segregation and admit the nigger race into our theaters, our swimming pools, our homes, and our churches." In 1957, he said allowing blacks access to polling booths was unconstitutional and tantamount to cruel and unusual punishment. William Rehnquist, former Supreme Court Justice, opposed desegregation efforts as he reportedly stated, "Plessy versus Ferguson was right and should be reaffirmed." He also supported ballot security, which was designed to prevent African Americans from voting in Arizona. Jeff Sessions thought the Ku Klux Klan was okay until he found out that some of them smoked marijuana. He believed corrupt leaders forced civil rights down the throats of people. He called a black man who worked for him boy on numerous occasions. He called a white civil rights attorney a disgrace to his race for litigating voting rights cases. William Buckley, famed hero of the conservative movement, made it clear that blacks were inferior to their white counterparts. He was blasé in the South's attempts to prevent blacks from voting. For him, whites represented civilization and blacks represented backwardness. This racist sentiment was summed up best when he said, "The white community is so entitled because, for the time being, it is the advanced race." These are the heroes of Fonda's detractors. As one can clearly see, the critics of Fonda have forgiveness or acceptance in their heart, for their support for these men has not waned. It must be understood, the words and actions of these American icons are far worse than Jane Fonda's actions in 1972. These men were traitors to human decency, and their opposition to blacks was nothing but disgraceful. Unlike Fonda's opposition to the Vietnam War, she was right on the issue, even though her actions in North Vietnam warrant some criticisms. Jane Fonda acted noble in her opposition to the Vietnam War. The men I just mentioned were anything but noble in their actions against African Americans. More importantly, if forgiveness or acceptance can be bestowed upon men such as Ronald Reagan for their past acts, then how can any pragmatic person claim they cannot forgive Jane Fonda? The unwillingness of many to forgive Fonda says more about that person than Jane Fonda.